Dad smiled. We sold it for $850,000. I shrieked. That's rightfully mine. He struck me. Listen to your parents. 24 hours later, 50 missed calls. MOM cried. The cops are here now. I hissed. Enjoy prison. Okay, listen, because what I'm about to tell you, it's going to make your jaw drop. Can you imagine finding out your whole life was a lie, shattered by the two people you trusted most in the world? And then, just when you think it can't get any worse, life throws an even bigger, more shocking curveball that changes everything? My story begins on a Tuesday, a cold, dreary, rain-soaked Oregon afternoon, the kind that just screams for a warm cup of tea and a cozy blanket. That's what I was trying to do, wrapped around a steaming mug in a quiet cafe. But inside me? There was a gnawing chill, a feeling that had absolutely nothing to do with the weather. The rain tapped against the window, blurring the street into a watercolor of grays and greens. The cafe hummed with the soft clink of porcelain, but the silence between us was deafening. My fingers were wrapped so tightly around my chamomile tea that my knuckles were white. The tea had long gone cold, but I didn't care. My entire world was focused on the man sitting across from me, Arthur. Arthur Brooks. He was staring out the window, avoiding my gaze, and a cold dread began to crawl up my spine. That should have been my first clue, shouldn't it? He always looked away when things got difficult. His jaw was tight, his shoulders tense. He was a million miles away, and I felt it. You see, I was there with a secret. A beautiful, terrifying, utterly life-changing secret tucked away inside me. I'd practiced telling him 100 times on the drive over. The words were right there, on the tip of my tongue. I'd imagined his face, surprise, then that slow, boyish grin I used to adore, pulling me out of my chair, spinning me around right there in the middle of the cafe. I was ready. So ready. I was about to look him in the eyes and say those 4 words that would change everything, I'm having your baby. But I never got the chance. Before I could even gather the last of my courage, he cleared his throat. The sound was like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending anxious ripples right through me. He finally turned from the window, but his eyes only met mine for a fleeting second. Beverly, he started, his voice uneven, hesitant. First, I need to tell you something. I blinked, my own perfectly rehearsed words dying on my lips. A nervous laugh bubbled out of me. That's funny, I whispered, my hand brushing the rim of my cup. I was about to say the same thing. A strange look crossed his face. Not curiosity, not even amusement, but something closer to outright panic. No, let me go first, he insisted, exhaling sharply, as if the words were a physical weight he had to force out. He took a long, slow breath. You are an amazing woman, Beverly. Honestly, you deserve so much. My heart stuttered. That's the kind of thing men say right before they leave, isn't it? It's the gentle, cowardly preamble to a goodbye. The cold dread that had been a whisper earlier now turned into a solid block of ice in my stomach. But the truth is, he continued, his voice dropping, I've fallen in love with someone else. The words didn't just hang in the air. They seemed to echo off the walls of the nearly empty cafe, growing louder and louder until they were the only sound in the world. For a split second, I was sure I had misheard him. It felt like a line from some cheesy movie, too dramatic, too unreal to be happening in my life, in this quiet little cafe, to me. But then I saw his eyes, once again fixed on the rain outside, and I knew. I hadn't misheard a thing. The world tilted on its axis. My carefully constructed future shattered into a million tiny, impossible pieces. He wasn't even looking at me. He couldn't even give me that. He was already gone. He kept talking, his tone awkwardly apologetic, as if he were explaining a dent in a borrowed car, not shattering a life. Please don't take it the wrong way, he mumbled, a phrase so ridiculous I almost laughed through the tears that were starting to prick my eyes. These things just happen. We're just different people, you and I. Maybe I never really loved you the way you thought I did. Each word was a physical blow. My hands, resting on the table, started to tremble. I fumbled for a paper napkin, folding and unfolding it until the flimsy paper tore between my fingers. I kept my eyes down, fixed on the polished wood grain of the table, as if staring hard enough could keep me from shattering right there in front of him. I just nodded once, then again, a tiny, jerky movement that felt like it took all the strength I had left. "I don't want you to hate me," he added, finally glancing at me. His cowardice was almost more painful than his betrayal. He wanted to be the good guy, even now. "And don't try to change my mind. It's over." The scrape of his chair against the floor was a sound of absolute finality. He stood up, a tall, shadowy figure against the gray light of the window. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a few bills, and set them on the table with a soft thud. "This should cover the check. Maybe your cab fare, too." My lips parted, but no sound came out. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. My hair fell across my face like a curtain, hiding the complete and utter emptiness in my eyes. He lingered for a moment, clearly expecting something. Tears, shouting, accusations, anything. But when nothing came, he shifted uneasily from foot to foot, then turned and walked toward the door. The little bell above it chimed faintly as it swung closed behind him, leaving only silence and the relentless sound of the rain. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in place. 5 minutes? An hour? The cafe, which had felt so cozy just moments ago, now felt like a vast, cold cavern. Every empty chair was an echo of what I had just lost. Finally, the waiter appeared, asking softly, "Your check, ma'am?" I barely looked up. I just slid Arthur's bills across the table, my voice flat and lifeless when I murmured, "Yes, thank you." He disappeared, and the silence settled in again. Slowly, as if in a trance, I lifted both hands to my stomach. I pressed them against the small, still flat place where our child was growing. A secret he would now never know. My chin trembled, and then the tears came. Not loud, hysterical sobs, but hot, heavy, relentless tears that rolled down my cheeks in silence, dripping onto my fingers that were curled protectively over my belly. I sobbed without a sound, my whole body quaking as the truth of my isolation sank in. This new life inside me was supposed to be a gift, a shared joy. But now, it was a secret I had to carry all by myself. Eventually, I made my way out of the cafe and into the rain. I didn't take a cab. I just walked, letting the cold drops soak my hair and clothes. I don't remember the walk to my car. I don't remember driving. My body was on autopilot, but my mind was a vortex of pain and disbelief. Somehow, I found myself parked outside my mother's house. I just sat there in the car for a long time, the engine off, the only sound the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers against the glass. I needed my mom. In that moment of complete devastation, all I wanted was my mother to hold me and tell me everything was going to be okay. That's what mothers do, right? With a deep, shaky breath, I got out of the car and walked to the front door, feeling like a lost child about to knock on the door of my own home. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, my wet shoes leaving faint marks on the worn linoleum floor. The familiar smell of my mother's lavender-scented cleaner hung in the air, but tonight it smelled sharp, almost suffocating. In the living room, the muted glow of a lamp cast long shadows across the beige carpet. My mother, Dolores, was sitting at the dining table, flipping through a stack of mail. My stepfather, Clifford, was there too, impatiently tapping at his watch, as if he were counting down minutes he didn't want to spare. I hesitated in the doorway, clutching my bag against my chest like a shield. For a moment, I thought about turning around and leaving, keeping everything to myself. But the weight of what had happened was too heavy to carry alone. I needed someone. I needed my mother. "Mom," I said softly, my voice cracking in the silence. Her hands stilled on the envelopes. She lifted her gaze, her eyes flickering with a mixture of surprise and irritation. "Beverly, what are you doing here? You look like a drowned rat." "Arthur's gone," I managed to say, his name feeling foreign and bitter in my mouth. He left me. And I'm pregnant. The word hung in the air, heavy and explosive. Clifford let out a low groan, leaning back in his chair. "We're going to be late if we don't leave soon," he muttered, checking his watch again. My mother ignored him for a moment. Her focus was fixed on me, but there was no softness in her eyes. "Pregnant?" The word came out sharp, like an accusation. I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes." I was going to tell him tonight, but he broke up with me before I could. "Listen, honey," she began, her tone smoothing into something that was meant to sound reasonable, but was as cold as ice. "You're only 22. You have your whole life ahead of you. These things, they can be taken care of safely. Medicine is different now. You can't just throw your life away because of a mistake." A mistake? This tiny life, my baby, was just a mistake to her? "Mom, it's not just something to get rid of," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "It's my baby." She shook her head firmly, her arms crossing over her chest in a gesture of finality. "Think about your future, Beverly. Your education. How are you going to manage a baby and a job with what? A teacher's starting salary? It's not realistic." Just then, the living room door opened, and my younger sister, Jeanette, walked in. She was humming a little tune, her face bright and cheerful. "Mom, have you seen my, oh, Beverly?" Her smile faltered when she saw my tear-streaked face. "What's going on?" I couldn't speak. I just stood there, dripping rainwater onto the carpet, my world collapsing around me. Jeanette looked from my face to my mother's stern expression. But it wasn't her face that held my attention. It was what she was wearing. Around her neck was a delicate silver necklace with a tiny, sparkling star charm. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that necklace. Arthur had shown it to me in a jewelry store window just last month. He'd said he was saving up for it for a special occasion, for me. And there it was, sparkling under the lamplight, resting against my sister's skin. The room started to spin. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. The vague someone else suddenly had a face, a name. My sister's face. "Where?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Did you get that necklace?" Jeanette's hand flew to her throat, her eyes widening in panic. She looked at her mother, a silent plea for help. "It was a gift," she stammered. "From who?" I pressed, taking a step forward, the ice in my stomach now a raging fire. "Beverly, stop it," my mother snapped. "This is not the time." "From who, Jeanette?" I shouted, the sound tearing from my raw throat. Jeanette flinched, tears welling in her eyes. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were the tears of a child caught doing something wrong. "From Arthur," she finally whispered. We've been seeing each other for a few months. We're in love." It was a double betrayal. A wound so deep I didn't think I could ever recover. My boyfriend and my sister, the two of them, together, behind my back. I looked at my mother, expecting, praying for some sign of outrage on my behalf. Instead, she just sighed, a long, weary sound of impatience. She stood up and walked over to Jeanette, putting a protective arm around her. "Beverly, your sister is happy," she said, her voice devoid of all warmth. "Arthur is a good man with a future. It just happened. You need to be an adult about this." Being an adult? They had shattered my life, my family, my heart, and I was the one who needed to be an adult? The betrayal wasn't just from Arthur and Jeanette anymore. It was from my own mother, standing there defending my sister's treachery. I was utterly, completely alone. I didn't say another word. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. I turned around, my body moving like a wooden puppet, and walked out the door, back into the relentless rain. I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove away with no destination in mind. The image of that silver necklace burned into my memory. I must have driven for hours, the windshield wipers keeping a frantic beat to the storm raging inside me. I ended up in a dingy motel room off the highway, the kind with a flickering neon sign and thin, scratchy blankets. I lay on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the water-stained ceiling all night. I didn't cry. I think I was beyond tears. I was just empty. A hollowed-out shell. In that silence, as the darkness of the room pressed in on me, my mind drifted to a different time, a warmer time. I remembered summers as a little girl, running barefoot through my grandmother Harriet's apple orchard just outside of Eugene. I remembered the smell of freshly baked apple pie cooling on the windowsill, the sound of her laughter carrying across the yard. I remembered the feeling of her arms around me, strong and safe. How she'd listened to my childhood worries as if they were the most important things in the world. Back then, life had felt steady, safe. That was it. That was the only place left to go. The next morning, I drove to the nearest bus station. I used the last of my cash to buy a one-way ticket to Eugene. I didn't pack a bag. I just left with the clothes on my back and the tiny, secret life growing inside me. The bus ride was long and quiet. I sat by the window, watching the suburban neighborhoods give way to open farmland, fields damp with morning dew, old barns tucked against rolling hills. The air seemed lighter out here, cleaner. I closed my eyes, letting the rhythmic sway of the bus calm the storm inside my chest. I pressed a hand to my belly and whispered silently to the only person in the world who was truly on my side, "We'll be okay, somehow. We'll be okay." By the time the bus slowed into the small rural station, the clouds had broken, and thin rays of sunlight spilled over the platform. I stepped down, feeling tired and lost. And then I saw her. My Grandma Harriet. She was standing at the end of the platform, wearing her old, worn cardigan, a scarf looped neatly around her neck. Her silver hair caught the light, and her eyes, the kindest eyes I've ever known, softened the instant they landed on me. Without a moment's hesitation, she opened her arms wide. "Beverly, sweetheart," she called, her voice warm and steady, just as I remembered. The moment I fell into that embrace, the tight, painful knot in my chest finally loosened. Her hug smelled faintly of flower and wood smoke, a scent that carried me straight back to simpler days. For the first time since I'd walked into that coffee shop, I felt a tiny piece of my burden lift. I buried my face in her shoulder and finally let myself cry. I cried for Arthur, for Jeanette, for my mother, for the baby, for the girl I used to be. And my grandmother just held me, stroking my hair, letting me pour out all my pain without saying a word. She just held me. And that was everything. "You should have told me you were coming," Grandma Harriet said, keeping an arm around me as we walked toward her old pickup truck. "I would have baked that apple pie you loved so much." I managed a small, watery smile. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you. I didn't want you to fuss." We drove back along familiar country roads, the fields stretching endlessly under the autumn sky. She filled the silence with gentle questions about my classes, my friends, how I'd been. I tried to answer, but my words kept failing me. It wasn't until we were sitting at her cozy kitchen table with steaming cups of chamomile tea between us that I finally let it all spill out. The farmhouse was just as I remembered, lace curtains on the windows, jars of preserves lined up neatly on the counter, and the old grandfather clock ticking steadily in the corner. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, staring into the steam, and told her everything. "He left me, Grandma," I said, my voice barely louder than a whisper. "Arthur's gone. And the woman he left me for? It's Jeanette." I saw a flicker of deep sadness in her eyes, but not surprise. It was as if she'd always known the character of her other grandchildren. "And I'm pregnant. Mom doesn't want me to keep it. She says it's a mistake." My grandmother's eyes never left mine. She didn't interrupt, didn't scold, didn't even gasp. She just listened, her gaze steady, her presence like an anchor in my storm. When I finished, tears were sliding down my cheeks again. I don't know what to do, I choked out. I don't want to lose this baby, but I can't do it alone. She reached across the table and took my trembling hands in her own. Her hands were wrinkled and strong, hands that had gardened and baked and mended for a lifetime. Then you won't do it alone, she said, her voice calm but resolute. This is your home now, for as long as you need it. When you finish school, you can move here permanently. The local school is always short on teachers. You can work there, and I'll help you look after the baby. Her words were so simple, so practical, yet they felt like a lifeline. For the first time since that horrible afternoon, I felt the heavy despair lift, just enough for hope to slip in. I squeezed her hands tightly, my tears now flowing for an entirely different reason. In that small farmhouse kitchen, I wasn't abandoned. I wasn't hopeless. My child and I, we had a place in this world. The months that followed were quiet and healing. I transferred my college credits to a local school and finished my degree. Grandma Harriet never treated me like a burden. She treated me like a daughter. We fell into a comfortable rhythm. We'd garden together in the afternoons, cook dinner in the evenings, and sit by the fire at night, her knitting needles clicking softly as I studied. She'd tell me stories about her own life, about the hardships she'd faced after my grandfather's passing, about the inheritance of resilience that was passed down through the women in our family. She taught me that strength wasn't about not falling. It was about getting back up every single time. And then that winter, in the modest upstairs bedroom with a quilt-covered bed and lace curtains, I brought my son into the world. The labor was long and fierce, but when the midwife finally placed the newborn in my arms, everything else faded away. He was so small, his fists clenched tight, his cries piercing yet strangely comforting. I gazed at him through tear-filled eyes, my heart swelling in a way I had never known possible. Walter, I whispered, the name feeling right and strong. Walter. He would bear my name, my strength. His future would not be tied to the man who had abandoned him before he was even born. From that day on, my life was turned completely upside down, in the most wonderful and exhausting way possible. The nights were a blur of feedings and diaper changes. The days, a marathon of juggling a newborn and my final college courses. But I never once resented it. I'd rise in the dark, silent hours, cradling Walter against my chest until his tiny breaths evened out, and I'd smile through the fatigue. Every milestone, his first smile, his first laugh, the first time his small hand wrapped around my finger, was like sunlight piercing through clouds. It was a pure, uncomplicated joy that healed parts of me I didn't even know were broken. It wasn't easy. Money was so scarce, I counted every penny. I took on part-time tutoring work, grading papers late into the night after Walter was asleep. But Grandma Harriet was my rock. She watched Walter when I had classes, cooked warm meals that kept us going, and always reminded me that persistence was stronger than despair. One step at a time, sweetheart, she would say, smoothing back my hair after a particularly long day. That's how you climb mountains. And so I climbed. I defended my final thesis with Walter asleep in a carrier at the back of the room. A few professors raised their eyebrows, but no one could question my determination. By the time I graduated, a worn diploma in one hand and my beautiful son in the other, I had already secured a teaching position at the small elementary school just a few miles from the farmhouse. My first day, I stood before a classroom of bright-eyed second graders, chalk in my hand, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Walter was barely 2 years old, toddling around Grandma Harriet's living room while I taught, his happy giggles filling the farmhouse during my lunch breaks. Teaching had always been my dream, and now it was my reality. It wasn't just a job. It was my way of providing a stable, loving life for my son. Life was modest, but it was full. I didn't have much, but I had everything that mattered. Each evening, I'd walk home from school with papers tucked under my arm, my heart lifting when I saw Walter running to greet me at the gate, his face lighting up. He had my eyes and my stubborn chin, but his laugh was a sound of pure joy that echoed through the quiet countryside. The community embraced us. "You've raised a bright boy," neighbors would remark when Walter tagged along at the market. "He's so polite, so well-spoken. You must be proud." Proud didn't even begin to cover it. Walter was my anchor, my reason, my entire world. When loneliness crept in at night, when memories of Arthur and Jeanette's betrayal threatened to sting, I would just tiptoe into his room. I'd stand there watching him sleep under his patchwork blanket, his small chest rising and falling, and I would know with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. I had chosen the better path. I was determined to put every spare dollar into a college fund for him, to give him every opportunity one never had. Grandma Harriet remained the steady guiding force in our lives. She delighted in rocking Walter to sleep, teaching him old songs, and sharing stories of my own childhood. The farmhouse became more than a refuge. It became the heart of our little family of 3. Years passed in that peaceful rhythm. I no longer thought of myself as abandoned. I thought of myself as whole, rebuilt into a new, stronger form. I was a mother, a teacher, and a granddaughter who had not let hardship destroy her. And every time Walter's laughter filled the house, I knew my life, though not the one I had once imagined, was exactly where it needed to be. Life in the small farming community settled into a steady, comfortable rhythm. I taught my students by day, graded papers at night, and poured every ounce of the rest of my energy into raising Walter. It was a full life, a good life, though sometimes in the quiet moments after Walter was asleep and the house was still, a wave of loneliness would wash over me. I had long since stopped expecting romance or love. My son was my heart, my class my mission, and my grandmother my anchor. That seemed like it had to be enough. But life has a way of weaving people together when you least expect it. It happened one spring afternoon when Walter was 5. A big storm had blown through the night before, and a whole section of the old fence along our property had finally given way. I stood in the yard with Walter, staring at the broken posts, my brow furrowed in frustration. "Well, that's just great," I muttered, pushing a stray strand of hair out of my face. Walter, holding my hand, asked innocently, "Mom, how will we keep the deer out of Grandma's garden now?" Before I could answer, a voice called from across the field. "Need a hand with that fence?" I turned to see a man walking toward us. I recognized him as Franklin Green, a neighbor whose land bordered ours. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with sun-weathered skin and the kindest eyes I'd seen in a long time. He was a carpenter by trade, a widower, and I knew from town gossip that he'd helped other neighbors with repairs more times than anyone could count. We'd exchanged pleasantries at the market, but nothing more. A touch of embarrassment colored my cheeks. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, gesturing to the collapsed fence. Franklin gave an easy, warm smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Don't worry about it. Happens to everyone out here sooner or later. I've got some spare boards in my truck. If you don't mind, I can have it fixed up in no time." I hesitated for a moment, a reflexive instinct to not accept help, to do everything myself. But then I looked at his open, honest face, and I nodded. "If you're sure, I'd really appreciate it." Walter was the one who warmed up to him first. While Franklin set to work, his movements efficient and strong as he hammered new boards into place, Walter peppered him with a million questions. Questions about his tools, about different kinds of wood, about how strong he was. Instead of brushing him off, Franklin answered every single question patiently, even letting Walter hold a hammer for a moment under his watchful eye. From that day on, Franklin began stopping by more often. Sometimes it was just to check on the fence. Sometimes to drop off fresh eggs from his chickens, and sometimes just to say hello on his way home from a job. I noticed how Walter's face lit up whenever he saw Franklin's truck pull up. I saw how natural it was for my son to follow him around the yard, chattering endlessly, and how Franklin always listened with genuine interest. He spoke to Walter, not like a child, but like a small person with important things to say. I was slower to open up. My past had left deep scars, and I guarded my heart carefully. But Franklin never pushed. His kindness was steady, his presence quiet but reassuring. He joined us for dinner once, then again, until it became a weekly habit. He never tried to take over, never acted like Walter wasn't my first priority. Instead, he fit himself gently into the empty spaces of our life, as if he had always belonged there. Seasons turned. Spring melted into a warm summer, which gave way to a crisp autumn. I found myself laughing more often, lingering in conversation with him on the porch after Walter had gone to bed. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his late wife, whom he had loved dearly, and the quiet years after she was gone. I, in turn, found myself telling him about my past. Not all the painful details at first, but enough. I told him about being a young single mother and the struggles I'd faced. He never offered pity. He only ever offered respect. I caught myself watching him, whether he was repairing a gate or just listening to one of Walter's long stories, and I realized that my chest didn't feel tight with fear anymore. It felt warm. It felt safe. I realized I was falling in love with him, and the feeling wasn't terrifying like it had been with Arthur. It was calm. It felt like coming home. A year after that first day with the broken fence, we were working in Grandma Harriet's little garden behind the farmhouse. The sun was warm on our backs. Walter was off chasing butterflies. Franklin was quiet for a long time, and then he put down his trowel, turned to me, and took my dirt-smudged hands in his. He knelt there on one knee in the soft earth of the garden. He didn't have a fancy box, just a simple, beautiful silver ring that he held in the palm of his hand. There was no grand speech, just a quiet, heartfelt promise that meant more to me than any flowery words ever could. "Beverly," he said, his kind eyes looking right into mine. "I'm not trying to change your life or replace anything you've lost. I just want to share it with you, and with Walter. I love you, and I love that boy like he's my own. I can't fix your past, but I promise I'll spend the rest of my life building a future where you never have to feel alone again." Tears stunned my eyes as I whispered, "Yes." Our wedding was simple, perfect. We held it right there in the backyard of the farmhouse, surrounded by a few close friends and our wonderful neighbors. Grandma Harriet stood proudly by my side, her eyes shining, and Walter, wearing a tiny, handsome suit, grinned from ear to ear as he served as our ring bearer. When the vows were spoken, and I became Mrs. Beverly Green, I felt like someone who had been given a second chance, not just at love, but at happiness itself. Shortly after, Walter and I moved into Franklin's farmhouse just across the field. Our two lives blended together seamlessly. The house that had been quiet for so long now echoed with Walter's laughter and playful shouts. For the first time in years, I would lay my head down at night, feeling my husband's steady breathing beside me, and my heart would feel completely, utterly at rest. It wasn't a dramatic whirlwind romance. It wasn't rushed. It was steady, genuine, and real. And that was exactly what I had been searching for all along without even knowing it. Life with Franklin and Walter was a peaceful dream. Walter was 7 now, a bright, happy boy who adored Franklin and called him Dad. I loved my job. I loved my family. And the painful memories of my past had finally faded into distant, hazy shapes. I truly believed I had left them behind for good. Then came the annual second-grade field trip to the museum in Eugene. The morning was bright and clear, a perfect day for an adventure. I walked at the front of my class, a clipboard in my hand, while the children chattered excitedly behind me. Walter stayed close to my side, his small backpack bouncing as he kept pace with the group. We had a wonderful time at the museum, where the kids marveled at dinosaur bones and ancient artifacts. Afterwards, with some time to spare before catching the train home, I led them to a nearby city park. The air was fresh, the grass still damp. Children darted ahead to look at the fountains and flower beds, their happy voices mingling with the rustle of trees. I smiled, calling for them to stay together, feeling a deep sense of pride. Pride for my students, for my son, for the beautiful, stable life I had built from ashes. And then, as we rounded the path lined with benches, I froze. Not 20 yards away, near the edge of the park, stood a couple. A man and a woman. I recognized them instantly. Arthur. And my sister, Jeanette. My breath caught in my throat. Time seemed to bend, pulling me back 7 years to that rainy cafe, to the words that had broken me. But this wasn't the same charming man I remembered. Arthur's hair was thinner, his face tight with tension. He was arguing with Jeanette, his voice rising in an angry, almost desperate tone. Jeanette, dressed in a sleek blazer, stood with her arms folded, snapping something sharp and dismissive back at him. People passing by slowed to watch as their argument escalated. I could hear fragments of their shouting, accusations about money, about his long hours at work, resentment simmering just below the surface. Arthur gestured wildly, his face flushed with frustration. The man who had once seemed so confident and in control now looked weak and bitter. I stood rooted to the spot, my students gathering curiously around me. My heart was thumping, but not with the familiar ache of old wounds. To my surprise, I felt nothing. No longing, no anger, not even a spark of the old pain. All I felt was distance, as though I were observing two strangers having a bad day from behind a thick pane of glass. Mom? I looked down. Walter was tugging at my sleeve, his blue eyes lifting to mine, full of concern. Are we going to keep walking? I blinked, the sound of his voice grounding me, pulling me back to the present. His small hand slid into mine, warm and steady. I smiled faintly and squeezed back. Yes, sweetheart. Let's go. Without another glance in their direction, I guided my students along the path, steering them toward the open lawn where ducks waddled near a pond. Behind me, Arthur's voice rose again, harsh and cracking. But I didn't turn around. I just kept walking away, hand in hand with my son, leaving the ghosts of my past to their own bitter arguments. In that moment, I realized something profound. The man and woman who had once shattered my world no longer had any power over me. They were just sad echoes from a life that was no longer mine. We spent another half hour at the park, letting the children run and play before it was time to head back to the train station. The kids were tired but still buzzing from the day's adventure. I walked alongside them, keeping count with my clipboard as we passed the shop fronts and cafes lining the street. Walter skipped a few paces ahead, pointing out a bakery display filled with frosted cupcakes. I smiled at his excitement, my heart feeling light and unburdened. Then my gaze drifted toward the window of a familiar-looking cafe, and I froze for the second time that day. Inside, seated at a corner table, the very same corner table from all those years ago, was Arthur. Time seemed to slow down. He looked older now, lines of stress carved deeper across his forehead, but the way he leaned back in his chair was unmistakable. Across from him sat Jeanette, looking stylish and confident. Between them, a little girl with curly hair, no older than 5 or 6, was toying with a spoon. My stomach tightened, my breath catching. For a moment, I couldn't move. My past, the betrayal, the heartbreak, all the nights I had cried myself to sleep, it was all sitting just a few feet away, smiling at another family. Then Arthur looked up. His eyes met mine through the glass, and they widened in recognition. He straightened up, and to my utter disbelief, he lifted his hand in a casual, friendly wave, as if we were just old acquaintances who had simply crossed paths on the street. Jeanette followed his gaze. When she spotted me standing on the sidewalk with a group of second graders, her lips curved into a smug, condescending smirk. She leaned close to Arthur, whispering something I couldn't hear. He chuckled, and then they both laughed. A shared, private mockery at my expense. The sound, even muffled through the glass, pierced me like a blade. All the old hurt, the humiliation, the feeling of being discarded. It all came rushing back in a hot, painful wave. My legs felt stiff, my chest heavy with the weight of years I thought I had already buried. But it only lasted for a moment. "Mrs. Green?" One of my students tugged at my sleeve. "Are we getting on the train soon, Mrs. Green?" The name was an anchor. I blinked, pulling myself back into the present. Walter was at my side now, looking up at me with concern. I forced my lips into a small smile and nodded. Yes, we are. Come on, everyone. Let's not be late. Gathering my class, I turned my back to the cafe. I turned my back on their laughter, on their judgment, on that entire miserable chapter of my life. They represented the voices, the memories. They could stay behind that glass. I guided the children swiftly toward the platform, my steps firm and purposeful. As we climbed aboard the waiting train, I heard a faint voice calling my name from behind. Beverly! I didn't turn. I ushered Walter inside, making sure every child was accounted for, my movements calm and deliberate. The doors slid closed with a soft hiss. The whistle blew, and the train lurched forward. Through the window, I caught one last glimpse of Arthur standing outside the cafe. His smile gone, his expression unreadable as he watched the train pull away. The train door closed, and it was like a final, definitive period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. It was over. Truly over. I exhaled slowly, my heart steadying. The past had reached for me one last time, but I had chosen not to take its hand. The train door slid shut, a solid final sound that separated my present from my past. As the train began to move, carrying me away from that street, away from that cafe, away from them, I felt a profound sense of release. I was finally, truly free. The train picked up speed, its wheels clattering against the rails with a steady, comforting rhythm. I guided my students to their seats, my teacher's voice calm and practiced as I counted heads one last time. Walter slid into the window seat beside me, pressing his small palms against the cool glass. He was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "Mom," he asked, his voice soft. "Who was that man?" "The one who was looking at you." My breath caught for a second, but I forced my shoulders to relax. I brushed a strand of hair from his face and smiled gently at him. A real smile this time. "Oh, him," I said, my voice light. "Just someone who thought he knew me, sweetheart." "Probably a mistake." Walter studied my face for a moment longer, as if weighing my answer. Then he seemed satisfied and nodded, turning back to the window to watch the city blur past. My own gaze followed his. And there he was, Arthur. He was standing alone on the platform now, his posture stiff. Jeanette and the little girl were nowhere in sight. He just stood there, a solitary figure against the concrete, watching the train depart. His eyes were fixed on our window, and they held an expression I had never seen on him before. Not arrogance, not mockery, but a hollow sort of confusion, almost regret. He raised a hand slightly, as if he was tempted to wave again, but then he let it fall uselessly to his side. My chest tightened, but not with the familiar ache of old wounds. Instead, a strange, unexpected sense of calm washed over me. I didn't feel anger or even pity. I just felt done. I didn't wave back. I didn't even nod. I simply turned my focus to the boy seated beside me, who was already pulling a notebook from his backpack to sketch the ducks he had seen in the park. The train carried us farther and farther away. Arthur's figure grew smaller through the glass until he was just a blur. And then he vanished altogether, swallowed by the distance. I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. For years, the shadow of that betrayal had followed me, creeping into quiet nights, making me wary of happiness. I had wondered what I would feel if I ever saw him again. Rage, grief, some desperate, pathetic flicker of hope? But now, in this moment, I felt none of those things. What I felt was peace. My hand rested lightly on Walter's shoulder, steady and protective. He looked up from his drawing, grinning as he held it out for my approval. I smiled back, my heart full, unburdened. The past had tried to catch me, tried to remind me of what I had lost. But I no longer lived there. My life was here, with this wonderful child who needed me, with the good man who loved me, with the home that was waiting for our return. By the time the train pulled into our small rural station, the sun was dipping low, painting the Oregon sky in shades of pink and gold. The children filed off, their chatter buzzing with the leftover excitement from the trip. I guided Walter down the platform, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. Each step away from the city felt like a step deeper into peace. When we reached our farmhouse, the warm smell of something savory and delicious drifted through the open kitchen window. The porch light was on, a welcoming golden beacon in the twilight. We walked inside, and there was Franklin. He was standing in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, moving confidently between the stove and the counter. He looked up as we walked in, his face breaking into that easy, wonderful smile of his. "Perfect timing," he said, lifting a skillet. "Dinner's almost ready. Just waiting on my fishing partner here." He winked at Walter. Walter dropped his backpack by the door and ran forward, practically bouncing on his toes. "Dad! Dad! Tomorrow I'm going to catch the biggest fish in the whole river. Bigger than the dinosaur we saw at the museum. You'll see." Franklin laughed, a deep, happy sound that filled the whole kitchen and ruffled Walter's hair. "Well, then I'd better bring an extra large pan because your mom is going to need proof." I leaned against the doorway for a moment, just watching them. The soft lamplight wrapped the room in a warmth that no storm could ever chase away. My son's laughter was clear and unburdened. The man I loved moved with the kind of gentleness that came from a love that was freely given, not taken. This was real. This was my life. Walter darted over to me, tugging at my hand. "Mom, you'll eat the first piece of my fish, right? Promise?" I bent down, brushing a kiss across his forehead. "I promise," I whispered, my smile tender. I glanced up at Franklin then, and our eyes met in a moment of quiet understanding. There were no grand gestures, no speeches, just the shared knowledge that what we had built together was strong and real, and it was more than enough. I slipped off my coat and hung it by the door. And as I did, I realized something. I didn't feel the weight of what had been. I didn't hear Arthur's voice in the back of my mind. I didn't see the shadows of that rainy cafe or the mocking laughter behind the glass. Those ghosts had no place here. They had been left behind on a lonely train platform where they belonged. What mattered was here. Now. It was the boy twirling in the kitchen, excited about tomorrow's fishing trip. It was the man stirring a pot on the stove, humming softly to himself. It was the life we had created together, steady and honest and true. I walked into the kitchen, wrapping my arms around Franklin's waist from behind, resting my cheek against his strong back. He reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. And in that simple, quiet moment, I knew with every fiber of my being that I was exactly where I belonged. It's funny how life works out, isn't it? The paths we think we're supposed to be on sometimes lead to dead ends just so we can turn around and find the right road waiting for us all along. Have you ever had a moment where you realized the painful past had finally lost its power over you? What would you have done if you were me on that train platform? I really want to know what you think. Share your thoughts in the comments below, ***.